Are you changing powder because you can't find what you need anymore? Or it's just gotten so stupidly expensive that you're looking for a less expensive alternative? Hi everyone, it's the Four Gun Guy. And today I wanted to talk about powder choice. A couple things I want to cover here is, I want to first go over the characteristics of the different powders, just really briefly. I'm going to be focusing on our PRS stuff, the powders we use for our cartridges, but we'll look at things like grain configuration and stuff like that. Then I want to go over two really important aspects of choosing that next powder, and those are the burn rate and the temperature stability of the powder. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I want to talk about how all of that, along with you choosing the next powder, could change or affect your accuracy. So if you're ready to go, let's get to it. Let's go over some powder characteristics. So there's some great articles that I found out there, and in this section I'm going to use one by Vidivori, the powder manufacturer, and they had a really good article on like grain configuration. So I'm going to put this thing up here, and basically you have different types of grain configurations for different types of, for different uses, right? You've got flake, ball, non-perforated, single perforated, 7 perforation, 18 perforation. And as I was doing this research, kind of took me back to my younger days when I was really playing around with solid fuel rockets. And these aren't the little like Estes rockets that you can buy at the hobby store. We built some pretty good sized rockets. And we had to take into consideration the grains or the grain of the solid fuel propellant. So we found very quickly that if you ran a hole through the grain, it would burn a lot faster, a lot hotter, and you'd get to apogee much quicker. And that's really a lot of what I found here. Now, there's also something that I found in my research that I really didn't know that they did, and that is provide a surface treatment to the powder as well. So in other words, you may have, if we look at this non-perforated or even the single perforated grain, they may provide a surface treatment that inhibits the burn rate a little bit, right? So it's a smoother burn rate. So just the characteristics, I just wanted to kind of go over that and let you know that what we really deal with for what we're doing is mostly the extruded grains, and it's really the non-perforated grain. So when I'm looking at things like 4350 and the 4895 and the Varget H4895, all of these are extruded, and so that's really what we're sticking with for our purposes. So let's move on to the two areas that I wanted to talk about. One is the burn rate, and then the other is the temperature stability. Well, burn rate is the first factor I want to talk about. Now, it's very interesting. You know, I started off with a 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge in competition, and for that I was running H4350. And if you look at this H4350 or any of these powders, you'll see like a recommended, you know, for what caliber, like a low and a high charge might be. You know, you'll see that on these. And to be honest with you, these are good places to start, but you'll generally never end there, right? You'll do your load testing and decide what works best for you, what velocity you want to attain within safe parameters, right? You're not going to keep loading hot loads if your primers are popping, or you're punching holes in your primers, or you've got case separation, or yeah, you're not going to be doing that. But you'll start low, you'll kind of work your way up, and once you see like a primer bulging a little bit, you'll start to back down. But this is not about that. This is just about what to look for if you're going to change powders. Because, for example, when I went to the 6mm BRA round, for me, I'm going to get comments saying people use 4350, and that's great, but I use alpha brass, and alpha brass has a smaller volume ability or capacity for powder. It's just because the brass is just made a little beefier for multiple reloadings. So I found that I couldn't get above a certain velocity with H4350, and I had to look at something else. Thankfully, H4895 from Hodgdon was still available, and I bought some H4895. I love this powder for my 6BRA. But guess what? You can't find this anymore, right? So then I had to look at a replacement. Well, I got some IMR 4895, which is a pretty good replacement, but we're going to see where it's different here in a little bit. And I have finally ended up at Varget, right? And as we start to look through these burn rates and temperature stabilities, you'll see how all of this factors in. So let's get back to burn rate. I'm going to jump right to it and say, if you look over here on the third column, and I'll put this up here on the third column, you'll see the H4350 ranked about 154th, right? It's a slower burning powder, but it worked really well in my 6.5 Creedmoor because I had higher case capacity and I could run my 140 grain ELDMs at about 2,750 feet per second. That's what they loved in my rifle. And then you've got, how your seating depth and all of those variables. But when I went to the 6BRA, as I said, I couldn't get above 2,600 feet per second with the amount of powder I was trying to put in the case. Some people use a drop tube, like this is a drop tube here on my funnel. Some people have drop tube that's a foot, just so they can cram as much powder in the case as they can. Good for them. I don't see anything wrong with that. I just didn't want to keep trying to shove 5 pounds of you-know-what in a 2-pound sack. So I went with something else, which was the 4895. So if we look at 4895, it's all the way over in the second column, and it's way down there, 119th on this chart. So what this is telling me is that 4895 is quite a bit hotter, or it burns faster than the 4350. All I'm saying is, as you start to research this and start to look at these burn rates and whatnot, you've got to realize that if I were to put the same amount of 4895 as I was putting 4350, let's say in my 6.5 Creedmoor, yeah, I'd probably have a lot of pressure, right? Because I'm putting a faster powder, the same amount in that cartridge, and it's burning much faster. That might be really dangerous. So my first note to you is, don't just go to another powder, drop the same amount and load it up in your rifle, right? You may get surprised. So you want to look at these burn charts, you want to see what's going on, how much slower or faster is this powder, and then we're going to do our research, right? In fact, we're probably going to do our research first. So the first thing we're going to do is research. I'm going to go out onto the forums. I'm going to go out onto Facebook, like I'm a member of the 6BRA Facebook group. Just put in fact, that's what I did. I said, what powder should I be using for 6BRA? Some people said 4350, others said Varget, 4895. So you come up with some good answers. Research the people who are giving you those answers and make sure that they are, decent shooters and know what they're talking about. They've made a lot of posts. People are affirming what they are recommending. Just do your research, and then you'll start to come up with a group of powders that might be good for you to use, right? So we've done our research. We look at the burn rate chart. We want to stay in our burn rate window, let's say. So again, when I came to 6BRA, I was looking at anything from like reloader 16 down to 48.95. So if you look at this chart, we can see the 48.95 is at 119. The Alliant Reloader 16 is at 139. Varget's at 135. So Varget is actually slower than the 48.95, but that's okay. It's still in that group, and you'll start to get an idea of, how fast do you want to run? What do I want to start off with an initial load? And then really, what you're going to be looking at availability and cost, right? So again, get a little matrix together. These are the 4 powders I'm going to look at. What's the cost, the availability, and then go from there. Look at the burn rate. But in this example, you can see that my Varget, my 48.95, and I think the IMR even, there's IMR 48.95 is 121. I'll highlight it. I don't have it highlighted yet. But that's right there at the H48.95. So these two burn rates are very similar, both 48.95s. So all I'm saying is just do your research, right? And then we'll start to look at that second variable, which is the temp stability. So let's go ahead and look at that next. Temperature stability. Now, this is something that just, I had a hard time with this one. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to bring up this chart. This is a stability chart. And if you look at this, this is the one with that I've outlined some things in blue. If you look at this chart on the left-hand side, it goes from the more stable to the less stable, okay? So at the very top of the list is Varget. Varget is one of the most stable powders out there. And what that means is, as the temperature changes, right? You may start your day off, like I have a match tomorrow, right? We're going to start in the morning. The temperature is going to be somewhere around 87 degrees. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature is going to be 105, right? Sounds like a big change, but at that higher temperature, that's really not a big change. But if you're shooting in an area that you start in the 50s in the morning, and in the afternoon it gets up into the 80s, like it can do here in the spring and the fall, then you're looking at a good 30, 35 degree temperature difference, right? And I have seen that affect my rounds as I go through a match or in practice. So you want a powder that's going to be fairly temp stable. Varget is really temperature stable. If you look at the H48.95, another Hodgdon powder, it's very stable as well, very close to the Varget. And as you look at H4350, that's why people love this powder in like the 6.5 Creedmoor and those types of cartridges, because it is a very temp stable cartridge. When I ran my 6.5 Creedmoor, I never noticed any issues with changes in temperature at all. This was really good powder. And then here's an interesting thing though. Now I want you to come down this list and look at the IMR 48.95. So remember we said just a minute ago that both of the burn rate for both of these 48.95s very similar, right? They were like within 3 places of each other. But when you look at the burn rate, look at this. The IMR 48.95 is, wow, what is that? 4 times less, I guess that's how I could put it, less temp stable than the H48.95, okay? Now, what does all this mean? Well, if I said before, if you are in an area that has extreme temperature changes, that may make a difference to you, right? And look, go out online and look at all the videos about temp stability, and here's what you're going to see. I packed 10 rounds in an ice cooler with some sub-zero temperatures and got them down to 30 below zero. And then I packed 10 other rounds at 175 degrees. And then I went out to the range to see what the difference was. Okay, I'm never shooting a match in 30 below zero. And I'm never shooting a match, I hope, in a volcano. So why am I doing that? Who cares, right? What I want to know is, how stable is this at this temperature range and this temperature range, right? Because I can promise you, I'm not shooting a match where it's 30 degrees in the morning and 97 degrees in the afternoon. I'm not doing that. So my point here is this. If I look at this temp stability list and I look at these numbers, I may say, look, Varget H4895, and even if I'm considering 4350 for whatever I might be doing, these three are pretty darn stable. I can use them pretty much whenever I want to. If I can only find something like an IMR 4895 that's going to give me a similar velocity that I was getting from my H4895, then what I may want to do is work up a summer load and a winter load with this, right? So let's try to find that area. Maybe it's, and we're going to see something here in a minute, maybe it's from 80 to 105. This is the load that I'm going to load for this, right? If it's below 80 that I'm going to shoot in, then I have a different load. Now, with that said, there's a great article, and I'll post the links to all this stuff, that this guy did with, now this was 223, but I'm using this as an example. He used a 77 grain Sierra Match King bullet, and he tested different types of powder. And I'm going to put this thing up here because this is very interesting. If you look at the Varget, right, which is that green triangle, inverted triangle, the temperature difference, right, 32 degrees, 68, and 104, the variation in the velocity is not that much. I think that probably goes up to, I think I have the table here, but I want to say that's going up to 2715, 2720. So a 20 foot per second difference between that whole range, right? Now, I mentioned earlier that I had an issue or I was confused about something, and that was, what's the baseline here, right? So when I'm looking at the chart I just showed you, or the graph I just showed you, and it has 0 degrees and 68 degrees or whatever it was, and 105 degrees, and then we look at the table that says Varget, that for example is 0.19 feet per second per degree. My question was, well, from where? From where's the baseline of that, right? It can't be from 0 degrees, right? Because then by the time you get to 100, you're at a 20 foot per second difference. So that didn't make sense to me. So I picked up the phone, I called Hodgdon, and got a really nice tech on the phone, and he explained it all to me. He says, what we do is we have our baseline at 70 to 72 degrees. And then we do tests from 0 degrees up to 125 degrees. And that's where they get that number, right? But he said, to answer your question, your baseline would be 70 to 72 degrees. So with that said, now I felt more comfortable, right? And as I look at that chart or that table, and I see that Varget is like 0.19, let's just say 0.2 feet per second per degree difference, that means if we are running, if I'm shooting that 100-degree day tomorrow, right, then my variation could be 6 feet per second, right? If I started at 70 something and I ended up at 100, it could be 6 feet per second. If we're starting at let's say 85 and I end up at 100, you know, what is that? That's 15, so it could be 3 feet per second, roughly. So that's not that big of a deal. But when you're dealing with the IMR, right, that could be a big deal. That was 0.87 feet per second, I think it was, or 0.89. Let's say 0.9, let's say 1 foot per second, yeah, a foot per second velocity difference over those degrees. Well, now if I'm starting in the morning at 70 and I'm ending in the afternoon at 100, that could be a 30-degree difference, right? So that's what I'm just saying. What you may do with that is start with something that would be in that 85-degree range, right, with your load, and see what you can get with that. So I just wanted to go over that because that was really, really bothering me. But the gentleman I talked to from Hodgdon really did explain it pretty well for me. Now, what I want to talk about next, and I'm going to cut to this, is what does this all mean from an accuracy standpoint? Well, I just released a video on the Ingenuity Precision powder meter here. And in that video, I talked about this very topic because we were talking about, okay, if I'm off a kernel or 2 kernels or 3 kernels, or where does that really start to affect my my impacts, right, out at distance? So same kind of thing happens here. Let's take the Varget. Let's say that it's an extreme day and we are off 6 feet per second from when we started the day and when we ended the day. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. The top is 2800, the bottom is 2794, and you can see that at 1,000 yards, that difference, that 6 foot per second difference, translates into a little over 1.5 inches. That's what it translates at 1,000 yards. So 6 feet per second, not that big of a deal, right? Now, with that said, let's look at 2780 to 2800 feet per second. And I'm going to do a whole another video on this one. The 2800 to 2780 to 2800, the top's 2800, the bottom's 2780. At 1,000 yards, now we are off about 5.5 inches, right? So we are 5.5 inches low with the 2780, which you would expect. At 500 yards, we are about 1 inch off. At 800 yards, we are about 3 inches off. So it's not huge, but you can start to see what's going on here. So that's at 20 feet per second difference. Now let's go to 50 foot per second difference. If we look at that, again, bottom's 2750, top is 2800. At 1,000 yards, we are off by 13, almost 14 inches. You're missing. You're missing any target out there almost. At 800 yards, you're off by about 8 inches. So yeah, now you're starting to see those velocities really, really affect your accuracy. And that's just the other thing I wanted to talk about. Well, let's go ahead and get to final thoughts. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. I tried to keep it kind of short, but I was just, I'm going through this right now and I thought, well, I'll do a video on it. So remember, what we did is we talked about powder characteristics, the different grain types, the burn rates and what that means. And then I looked at the 2 things that really affect that, right? It's the burn rate and the temperature stability. So on the burn rate, you're going to want to stay kind of close to what you're using or what you're switching away from. And then when you get to that temperature stability, you're going to want to just consider, do I even need to worry about that? Or am I doing something like this IMR 4895 that I may have to have a winter load and a summer load, right? And then do some research on how you want to work that load up, right? I mentioned earlier that you may have a low end and a high end velocity wise that you're okay with dealing with. But what I didn't mention, and again, it's very important, I did mention this in the beginning, but I want to mention it again, stay within your safe limits, right? So if I'm saying that I'm going to work up a load from 85 degrees or 80 degrees to 105 degrees, and I'm going to go in the middle, be careful of that, because you want to make sure that if you're starting in that middle, that when you get to 105 degrees, you're not running a hot load. You've got pressure signs, primers are bulging and all that stuff, right? You don't want to do that. So take that into consideration. You may have to just start with this lower velocity load. So when it does get 105, your velocity is increased, but it's increased within safe margins. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I got a bunch of other stuff coming up, and yeah, I'm really excited about it. Thanks again, everyone, for the subs, the comments, the likes. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, shoot straight.